My name is Bill Gayler. I've been the branch chief for Andrew. Good to see you. World's finest fixed-wing pilot right there in Europe. I've been the branch chief for about 3 weeks now, so it's kind of nice being back immersed in aviation. I spent last year at U.S. Army Europe as a deputy commander, and lots going on in Europe. Of course, there's a lot going on all over the world. I think that's the only thing that we know with clarity, is the fact that the world's chaotic and complex, and it's only going to continue to be the same way. So with that as a starting point, I think it's probably obvious if you heard me this morning kind of where my thoughts are and where I think we need to focus. We are going to have to balance limited resources. We have got to ensure that we have trained and ready forces for the current fight. We have to ensure that we have modernization strategies that enable us to prepare for a future battlefield as outlined in the Army operating concept. And we also have to do so with the current force structure that we have, or wherever it ends up. So we have some challenges ahead of us, but I firmly believe, and oh, by the way, if I turn toward these speakers and you get a lot of reverberation, I apologize. I was instructed to keep my back to the stage. I'll mess that up. I think it's critical right now that we understand that power matters. So at the end of the day, we have soldiers that operate inside of our airframes who do unbelievably complex things at great risk. It's our job to make sure that we can mitigate risk in the future for them and make sure we're capitalizing on technology that's out there that makes it a little better for them. So power, to me, is huge. We've acquiesced a lot of it. That means maneuverability at the objective. If we always had adversaries that were nice and didn't shoot at you, you wouldn't need maneuverability. That's not how life is. We got to have maneuverability. We got to have speed and range that enable us to operate at an operational depth rather than a limited tactical depth. And we have to have the ability to operate in any environment. So whether that is snow or rain or dust, and when I say operate, I'm talking not take off and land and limited hover. I'm talking operate, own it. That is where my thoughts are. And it really is truly about the future. We must maintain a foot in the current fight because it's non-negotiable. We've got to win that. We've got to take care of soldiers today. But we also need clearly to be looking at the future. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if I need a mic. You can hear me now.
I can hear you.
Jen Johnson with Defense News.
I think she's turning it up now.
Can you hear me now?
I think so.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
You can definitely hear me. Jen Judson with Defense News. I wanted to ask you, said that your last gig was in U.S. Army Europe, and I know that General Hodges has said that aviation is the #1 priority and a need in Europe. So can you elaborate on what types of assets and capabilities Europe does need now,
Sure.
What we don't have and what we do need?
Sure. So in Europe right now, we have a 12th CAB headquarters. Not the 12th U.S. CAB, but its designation is 12 CAB. It is a CAB minus headquarters with limited capability, and that capability is mission command of a general support aviation battalion, which is theater support that Andrew Evans back there flies for. That is fixed wing capability, UC-35s and C-12s, to enable not only the USAR commander, U.S. Army Europe, but also the European Command, EUCOM commander, and Commander SHAPE, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and AFRICOM commands to get in and around Europe. It also has a command aviation company of UH-60s to operate in and around Europe, Central Europe as well. There was a full cab there a while ago, but based on force structure reductions, it had to come out. And certainly not second guessing any decision made previously, but I think everyone expected or hoped that the European threat was less than elsewhere in the world. So they saw a bit of a peace dividend, and now I think we're seeing that was not probably a good read on the European environment. There's also an attack battalion, an AH-64 battalion, that is in Europe now as a permanent battalion, but it is technically redesignated 1-3. It belongs to Jeff Decker back here somewhere. Yeah, so they have to, they give up an attack battalion, so Europe has it on hand. And eventually a decision will have to be made whether or not that attack battalion comes back to the United States or if it stays forward in Europe. That decision now will not come until next year at the request of USAR and General Hodges and myself when I was there. The assault battalion that is on the ground in Europe is a rotational solution from Fort Hood, Texas, out of Jeff Thompson's brigade. 3rd of the 227th is currently, in Eastern Europe, and I'll tell you that how we're using aviation in Europe is pretty amazing. I mean, we've got elements that are in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, back at Grafenwehr in Germany, and episodically in and out of Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, etc. So nobody's wasting their time. They're very busy all the time. And that's why he says it's his greatest concern, because the amount of work to be done in Europe, we lack the capacity to do, because we do operations simultaneously in multiple nations at great risk. So if you were to look at how you mitigate risk, it's one, you ensure that you are rigorously trained, to make sure you're capable of performing the mission, and you develop units that adhere to standards and discipline, all of which they do. The third element to me of mitigating risk is supervision, placing the right senior person over a tough mission at the right time. That's some of what they lack, because they're in so many countries at one time. In some instances in Europe, the senior U.S. Army commander in a country is a captain. Captain. It's pretty impressive. One, it's a huge demonstrated trust in the competence of that young leader, but it also makes you not sleep well at night when you're in charge of those people, because you do worry about them. You check on them often, you try to insert supervision on top of them where you can, but there's more work to be done in Europe than there are airframes and command and control nodes to do, frankly. And I think we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I don't know where decisions will be made about how do we permanently account for that demand in Europe or not. Of course, NATO plays a huge role in that, but NATO, by the way, is the longest, most successful alliance in history, and it is critical to U.S. security interests. 50% of the global GDP goes between Europe and the United States. Pretty big, pretty important. And NATO does a lot more than NATO gets credit for, frankly. but NATO doesn't necessarily have aviation capability or capacity like we do either. They do have, but it's not exactly structured the same way. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks. Sir. Oh, microphone?
Sir, Dave Vergan from Army News Service, and I was listening to your briefing this morning, and you said about the weight that's being added, like 78 pounds a year, I think, and how the legacy aircraft from the 70s, and you were concerned with that. Would ITEP be one way to alleviate that, and where are we right now with that program? Because I don't even think a selection's been made yet.
Correct. So yes, ITEP would do that. ITEP is funded in the POM and the LIRA, so we do have a plan, but it's yet to go to competition with picking a final solution. But when you look at what we do to maintain an edge over an adversary, it usually is a solution that we put on an airframe. And every time we add a solution, it adds weight that must be accounted for somehow. The reality is, if it's linear, which it generally is, it's 77.8 pounds, 78 pounds a year for a little over 2,400 or 500 and some odd pounds that's been added to the U-860, for example. That equates into maneuverability at the objective area, and it equates to limited ability to get into certain environments or envelopes, usually high altitude and hot temperatures. So that's why ITEP is critical. We must get it right to buy back that maneuverability, to enable us to then use less numbers of airframes to accomplish the same task regardless of condition. So if we know the demand exceeds capacity, a way to get a little more capacity is through efficiency. So using 4 aircraft instead of 8, because they have the power available, frees up those other 4 or 5 aircraft to do something else. So then we have the effect of more without growth. So yes, ITEP is critical to that. Other questions? Hey, and oh yeah, thanks.
Hello, sir. Grant Turnbull from Shepherd Media. You mentioned this morning that you were concerned about the runway requirements for UAS.
Yes.
I wondered if you could just go into a bit more detail about what that might mean for future requirements and capabilities, maybe something like a VTOL UAS, for instance.
Yes. So yeah, that's certainly a runway independent option, but we need to have that capability to more forward station with units and commands that unmanned capability, and keep the sensor and the link to the person desiring or needing the information forward. So whether that's, I'm not saying that solution must be VTOL, but it has to be independent of a runway system. We need UASs now that also are scalable, have frankly, the ability to control multiple types of UASs with one common controller. So if we get that capability, and coupled with other developments, I think it'll be far more flexible or enhancing to a commander on the ground. So. Yes.
Hi, sir. James Drew from Flight Global. Could I just follow up on that and just ask you, we've heard a little bit about that Runway Independent UAV concept that you want, but I haven't heard a lot about timing. Is this a near-term requirement, 5, 10, 15 years? And are there any concrete programs that are starting to formulate out of this stated need?
So I would tell you, sooner is always better with that capability. I don't off the top of my head know the exact timeline. I do have folks here, I'm sure, that are tracking exact timelines of that. 25 is the requirement window? Yeah. I memorized a lot in 3 weeks, but that wasn't one of them. Yes.
I want to ask about Lakota Training and how that's taking shape. And I know a couple of years ago there was a lot of talk about revamping the program using a lot more simulation and potentially taking out or scaling back training auto rotations to the ground, things like that. So if you could give me sort of an update on where you are and how the training program is being shaped, that would be helpful.
Sure. Well, first off, you know, we continue to, in its infancy right now, we continue to assess the effectiveness of that aircraft. But to date, we're certainly pleased with what it's doing right now. We will continue to watch it over time, though, and find out, do we need to make adjustments to a program of instruction inside of the flight school to account for those adjustments or not. But right now, we're relatively pleased with it, but it's, again, in its kind of infancy right now. So.
What does it look like now? How much simulation versus
The simulation mix to flight hour mix? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Lakota simulation mix to flight hour mix in flight school. Yeah.
I could go by phase with you. In the first phase, it's 28.2 hours and 4.5 hours of simulation. The second phase, basic instrument, is 30 hours and 100% simulation. And the next 3 phases have a total of like 7 hours of simulation, out of about 25 to 31 hours.
So roughly about 12 to 15% overall.
That will continue to likely have a recommendation to increase as the built-in simulation gets truer, but it's proven to be invaluable right now. And I'm from the flight school, so that's the point.
what? Sorry, what is your name?
I can give it to you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Gotta close it.
Yeah, no, it's good. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, related question on...
Related question on Lakota.
Okay.
It's used as training, and I think the Guard might have some. Would there be a need for a light utility helicopter in the active Army at some point, like the Huey served? And would the Lakota possibly fill that role as a light helicopter to do various transport missions?
So from a deployable platform, no, it's not designed to do that. For off-burdening of some things of routine missions back in the States, absolutely, and we do it today. In fact, we've had them for years as light medevac capability. We've had the OCT mission at our combat training centers, have utilized them pretty extensively. But from a hardened combat vehicle standpoint, no, I don't think there's any desire to look to that. And, you know, frankly, as we look to continue to modernize and to potentially fill any gap, we're looking at future vertical lift, because we want to be able to maximize speed, range, endurance, coupled with power from ITEP that gives us much more growth, rather than further adjusting current airframes that will not give you what we need them to do. So, in my opinion.
Sir, Latney Salt from the Western Army Aviation Training Site.
Is that you or me?
I don't know, probably me. Sticking to training, I was wondering if you had an update for us on the release of the new .11 and maybe the DATM, which was supposed to follow that.
For which airframe? What are you talking about?
Well,
I honestly don't know what you're talking about.
The Commander's Guide with the .11.
Oh, the Commander's Guide.
The Commander's Guide, the release of that would also potentially change the ATMs. We'd go to a DATM.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's still going to be the plan.
Yeah, when
and
is
if there's
the
maybe a timeline?
when is the published Commander's Guide, Rob?
The
Thanks. Colonel Alt, I'm the Director of Training and Doctrine down at Fort Rucker at USAACE. The current .11, or the .11 has been rewritten, and we anticipate that, bottom line, to probably be published within about the next 6 months as we get it through the staffing process. It's currently out for field staffing, and it's going to take the individual ATMs. What we're trying to do is make them more responsive to the field. So it bumps them down one level of hierarchy in the publication ladder, and that allows us that as changes occur, we can make changes in that ATM without going through the Army publishing bureaucracy to the extent that Rucker can do it at its own level. Probably the most significant thing that .11 is going to do is put tasks, collective leader tasks in there. So platoon leaders have to demonstrate proficiency along plan, prep, and execute. Commanders as well. In an 8-part window rated by their next higher commander. It also takes all those tasks and bends them together and then pulls them individually, so that the duplication of tasks across aircrafts will be removed as well. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Sir,
John.
what keeps you up at night as the branch chief?
Well, I think, when we look at our institution's ability to kind of adjust, frankly, I'm very comfortable with it. We've got incredible talent that is mitigating risk. We adjust doctrine, we adjust programs of instruction, we adjust how we train leaders. All of that I'm very, very comfortable with. When we look at producing soldiers and leaders, of character that are competent in everything they do and that are committed to service to their nation, everybody should be comfortable with that. If you aren't, find a soldier, pat him on the back. You should be comfortable with it. But I think what kind of keeps me up at night is, looking at the future, what we see, what we know we must be able to do, and our ability to strike the right balance between the current readiness requirement and the future modernization strategy. That frankly concerns me. And I think I made the comment this morning, I don't want my grandchildren to be flying the same aircraft my father flew. We can do better than that. But it is all tied to resources, and that's kind of what keeps me up at night.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, John. Hey, so thank you to all of you for the interest here. Thanks to many of you for your service in uniform, as well as your continued service during your retirement from service. We're very fortunate that we have an opportunity to continue to bring young soldiers and leaders together of today with those that came before them, and we truly have the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of our forefathers that enabled us to get to a certain level. We do not take that for granted, and it's a very special thing we do to serve. So thank you all for your time. Please catch me anytime walking around if you have further questions, but I appreciate it. All right, thanks.